So you want to visit Europe and you have no idea how to plan your vacation, what to expect, or how to navigate the cities you intend to visit, or how to navigate the language barrier if you're English speaking, figuring out suitable accommodation, public transportation, tourist traps, or generally things to do on your trip. Well, I will be answering all of your concerns and questions in a bit. Hello people, you're welcome back to my channel. My name is Moy Douglas, and on this space I share informative content around my perspective and experiences living, working and navigating the EU as an African expert. So kindly hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, and do not forget to like this video, give it a thumbs up if you find it helpful or interesting. Thank you. So today I'll be unpacking some tips on how to plan and execute your next Europe vacation. So whether you're in the EU and want to visit other cities or countries but do not know how to go about it, or perhaps you're outside of the EU and you have been stuck on planning your Europe vacation, this video will be helpful. One of the first things you should consider when planning a vacation within Europe is utilizing budget airlines. If you're planning a trip on a budget, then you should definitely consider using budget airlines like Ryanair or EasyJet, for instance. When traveling within Europe, it is very common to see flights as cheap as under 20 euros, depending on your route, and it's a great way to save on your entire vacation experience. I personally use budget airlines, and they are pretty decent and comfortable. However, there are a few things to note, or else your budget flight cost can go from 20 euros to over 100 before you blink on the same day. So the first thing to note when utilizing budget airlines is the online check-in time or window. So after booking your flight on Ryanair, for instance, online check-in is open 24 hours prior to your flight departure time. So set a reminder to remind you to check in on time, to check in online and on time, because checking in at the airport prior to your flight, a few hours, I think 2 or 3 hours to your flight, will incur an additional cost of up to 50 euros or upwards. So you do not want to incur this additional cost while flying. So make a mental note to sign in and check in online 24 hours to your flight departure. The second thing to note is your seat selection. Well, you can select your preferred seat while you're checking in online at an additional cost of about 8 euros. However, I do not think this is necessary unless you are traveling as a couple, a group, a family, and you insist on sitting together, or perhaps you're traveling with a child or an infant maybe, and you want to sit next side by side, in which case you can go ahead and reserve your preferred seat when you check in at an additional 8 euros per seat selection. If that's not the case, you can go ahead and check in and take any seat assigned to you on the flight. You're still going to get to your destination anyways. Another thing to note is that passengers are grouped as priority or non-priority depending on the ticket that you purchased. So priority passengers get to board the plane with a small cabin suitcase, and non-priority passengers are only allowed a small bag that can fit under the seat. So if you want to travel with additional luggage or checked-in luggage, this will come at an additional cost of about 20 to 40 euros depending on the weight of the suitcase. The next thing to note is that there is no complimentary food, snacks, or water on the plane. So have a small budget for that if you intend to eat on the flight, as everything comes at a price. Alternatively, I suggest that you eat at the airport lounge and you'll be fine, as most flights within the EU usually span between 2 to 4 hours, and that's it. Please note that these tips only apply to flying or using budget airlines, and in this case, specifically Ryanair. So it is very possible to spend, say, a week or a weekend in Lisbon, for instance, with a return ticket within the EU for under 50 euros as a non-priority passenger, and with a backpack, and let's say a budget of 10 euros for, in-flight snacks, if you wouldn't mind, and it will be just fine. So the next important thing to note about planning your trip or vacation in the EU is your accommodation, obviously. This is one of the tricky ones, and I think it boils down to your budget and your preference. There are several options such as Airbnbs, hotels, and even hostels. Airbnbs are my personal favorite when traveling the EU. So in terms of cost and preference, you would have to find what works for you. However, I have a couple of tips for you to keep in mind when choosing a suitable accommodation for your vacation. The first and obvious thing to consider when picking a suitable accommodation is the location. You need to consider the distance to the airport and the proximity to the city center or the places that you intend to visit. Let me emphasize that you have to carefully consider the location of your accommodation, as this will make or mar your entire vacation experience. You can use Google Maps to estimate the distance and connectivity, and you can compare distances by car, train, bus, metro, and whatever form of transportation is available within the city. You also want to consider your arrival time and departure time and your options of leaving and returning to the airport when you make this decision. I mean, you don't want to be in a situation where your return flight is by, say, 5 a.m. or 6 a.m., for instance, and the closest train station to your accommodation is like a 20 minute walk, and there are no available ride hailing services in the city. And then you have to, local, so you have to, rake your brain around how you can, get to the airport on time to meet your flight, and then end up spending, huge amounts of money on city cabs, which can be very expensive if you ask me. So these are all the things you have to put into consideration when you are selecting an accommodation. So the bottom line is put every single detail into consideration when planning your trip because they are all connected. The second thing to know when you're booking your accommodation is to read reviews. I cannot emphasize this enough. Please read reviews, guys. Whatever kind of accommodation you eventually settle for, before you book, ensure that you read the reviews, especially the recent ones. You do not want to end up in a humid or crappy Airbnb or in a neighborhood that is unsafe or like a drug den. And this is speaking from, secondhand experience, and or in a hostel with 40 bunk beds if you're not comfortable with that. So it's important that you read the reviews. The reviews don't lie. The next thing you should figure out ahead of your trip is public transportation. Most European cities have excellent working transportation, so this is not a problem at all. So all you need to do is figure out how it works ahead of your trip so you are not in a fix. Most cities have trains or metro stations that take you from the airport directly into the city, and others have buses that take you also into the city or sometimes to the nearest train station. And you can find out what your options are by using Google Maps. Public transportation is quite affordable and it's also a great way to see the city which you're visiting. So I totally recommend using public transportation while visiting European cities. Now, if you're not on a budget, you can explore using ride-hailing apps like Uber and Bolt. However, it's important to know that they are not available in all cities, like in Rome, for instance. So it is important to do your research to make sure that they are available. And if they are not, you make alternative arrangements for taxi options or still fall back to public transportation. Next on my list for things to prepare for, have at the back of your mind when planning your European vacation is the language. As you know, most EU countries have a specific official language, and this might be a challenge if you are only English speaking. But this is not a problem at all, so do not let the language barrier keep you from exploring all of Europe. It will surprise you the number of locals that can actually communicate in English, and you can also get by at service points. My tip here would be to try to learn the basic words in the language of your destination country or city. I mean, learn simple courtesy like hello, please, sorry, and excuse me. I think I'm starting to sound like Cocomelon. Sorry, excuse me. Anyways, in my experience, locals tend to be more friendly and helpful when you try to communicate in their local language or at least show an interest. Well, now it seems like this video is starting to get way longer than I had hoped. So I'm going to pump the brakes here and let it spill over to a part 2. This is because I still have a whole lot to share on the subject matter based off of my own experiences traveling the EU. And I do not want you to make the same rookie mistakes that I have made in the past. It would help if you could ask some specific questions you want me to answer in the next video in the comment sections below. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. And until I come your way again in my next video, do have an amazing day. Bye-bye.